Welcome to Mystere Creations. As usual, I'm your host, AJ, and today I'm speaking with Tyson of Karbon Brewery. Karbon Brewery is not the usual, in that they are doing things different and working towards becoming carbon negative. This is a good one, so grab a beer, preferably a carbon brew, and join us for this journey. Welcome, Tyson. It's nice to have you on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Can you tell me a little bit about yourself and Karbon Brewery, please?
Sure. My name is Steven Tyson, but everyone calls me Tyson. I run a company called Karbon Brewing. We are based out of the Toronto GTA area of Ontario, Canada. And we are trying to change the way we look at brewing and manufacturing in food and beverage. From a perspective of, environmental consciousness or climate change focus, trying to tie in all of the science out there with, the business models and business theory, and how do we really, play a role in what the future of business and brewing looks like.
Excellent. Can you tell us a little bit about how your company is working to become carbon negative?
Yeah, so basically, our story kind of started with, how most stories started, which is an idea, and you're driving in your car and you're like, hey, that would be a really good idea for a business. And so basically what we did was we started to look at every aspect of brewing. So, if you look at any sort of manufacturing process, you have raw agricultural inputs. Generally, you have water, you have energy, you have all these things, hops and barley and things like that. And then you put it into some sort of machine and it spits out some sort of product on the other side, right? And then, so with that entire process, there are so many portions of that process that you can identify as opportunities to change things. And what I mean by that is, where did you get your grains? Where did you get your agricultural inputs? How much energy is being used? Where does that energy come from? How much water is being used? Where does that water come from? And then, the process goes on and on and on. So what we tried to do was look at it, the entire manufacturing process of beer, in a holistic view, right? Beer is something that has been similar for a long time, right? It's been around for thousands of years. It's one of the oldest beverages in the world. And the way you produce it has generally stayed the same, other than, kind of bringing it up to the 21st century and manufacturing processes. So now what is the task that we're trying to accomplish is to really identify those key portions of areas that we can change, so that we can bring it to the next level, which is, to fit into what hopefully the future looks like, and kind of align with science-based targets and all these other things. So really what we're trying to do is look at things from a scope 3 perspective, to get, pretty technical there, which means everything going into the process, everything during the process, and then everything downstream or after the process, including, what people do with that packaging or that recycling, or, what happens at the end of that product life. Okay.
Can you explain a little bit about how you deal with water use?
Yeah, so for sure, water is a huge input in beer. Obviously, it's majority of what you actually do. It's just flavored water really coming out of the other side. So, I think with regards to water use, and specifically, it's something that we have to be concerned about as human race and humanity as water supplies change and levels change. So, one of the things that I would say is the best way to look at it is, the average craft beer producer in North America uses about 10 liters of water for every 1 liter of beer produced, right? That's just a kind of an average statistic. And that includes everything from the water that actually goes into the brew, all the way to the cleaning process, washing the equipment, washing the bottles, things like that. So basically, if you start to try to say, okay, 10-1 is the average ratio. What can we do to start to eliminate that or reduce it down to, a 4-1, 5-1, 3-1 ratio, which is, where some of the producers are actually going these days. There are some breweries out there that are trying to hit that kind of 3 or 4, to 1 ratio. And they're doing things like collecting, recycling the water that they're doing. So, one of the problems that we're trying to solve is, what do we do with all this water at the end of the cycle, right? Because you basically have a bunch of excess water that has either gone through the process or has been used to wash things or whatever it is. And so can we recapture that water and then start to reintroduce it into certain parts of the process, in areas maybe that don't need specifically super clean water, right? Like, gray water is the word that they use most often for that. So, it's really capturing everything that we use and then kind of reusing it for the next batch, which then, stops us from using fresh water. Another huge component of this is like, the amount of waste that goes into the water and, what does that look like from an output perspective into, you're releasing a lot of this water back into the water streams, the municipalities. And so, what organic matters in that, how is that treated, what kind of effluent is coming out of your system and, what are you really doing, with that water at the end of the cycle as well. So it comes back to that whole kind of model of the way we're looking at things from a perspective is to really start to see all of those opportunities for change and then slowly, systematically kind of work on each one, right? How do we treat our water? Where do we get it? What are we reusing it for? And just asking a lot of questions about, the process in general.
Okay. In dealing with climate inequality, can you tell us how you're using your business to help lessen inequality?
Yeah, I think you're going to start to see like a constant theme here in most of these kind of answers, which is, we're just looking at things from a different perspective. I think, with the pandemic, 2020, when we started this business, everyone in society start to look at like who they are as a person and, how do I think about everything that's going on in the world? There's all these social justice issues going on. There's all these inequality issues, vaccines, science, all this stuff going on in the world. And, you start to do some reflection on who you are as a person, what role you play potentially in society or in, the future and change. I think everyone has a different role, obviously, we have a privilege as, Canadians and as, generally I'm a white male. So like, I have a certain level of privilege that's associated with who I am as a person, right? And how do I use that as a tool to actually create some of the social change that I want to see? So, for instance, in the beer industry, generally it's a European industry and European, male dominated industry. So, when you start to look at that industry in general and look at it from a different lens, you say, okay, probably needs some change here, probably needs a little bit of diversity, specifically in the industry and also within the marketing, right? Who are they marketing to? They're marketing to traditionally white men. So, okay, so how can we change that? And how can we invite other people to become, beer drinkers or to be involved in the process or whatever is going on? I think with regards to inequality, I think it's something you have to consider in the climate change debate as well, right? Generally, the most vulnerable communities are the ones that are most affected by climate change or water shortage, as we mentioned before. So, it's like, how do we tie all these things together? And then what role do I play as a business owner and as a, a person in this situation? And how can I use my voice to potentially amplify other voices or, kind of stand up for things that I believe in? And, what role does my company play in that kind of transition as well?
What programs do you guys deal with regularly?
In regards to like, these social issues?
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically one of the main things that we tried to do is say, okay, we're a brand new company. We don't have a lot of resources. We don't have a lot of capital. We don't have this giant platform yet of people who follow us or, listen to our voice. But how do we start to bring people along the journey and start to introduce these themes along the way, right? So one of the first things we did was to set up kind of set of values as a business, which, if you go back to a business 101 class, they're going to say, okay, what's your vision? What's your values? What are these company philosophies that you believe in? And one of the first things that we could do as a company was set up something that we believe in. And so one of our beers is, behind me on the wall here, and it stands for Justice, Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, which is a set of framework that, a lot of HR departments use, a lot of companies use, but specifically the United Nations use in kind of their diversity and inclusion framework. So, it's something small that we can do as a company, which is to name one of our beers after kind of our core values, that really shows people, hey, we don't really have a lot of money. We can't donate, millions of dollars to some of these causes yet. But what we can do is show people that we care about these things. And so that was one of the first steps that we did. Then we started to kind of, reach out to other people and organizations, start to ask questions. I think, one of the things is I don't have all the solutions. My perspective, my voice and, vision for everything isn't always the most correct. So, it's more for us about asking questions about what we can do to help people that need it, or, in certain social situations, and, then start to reflect on how we can do that best. I think we also, as a company, don't want to be a reactionary company, in the sense of like, there's a huge reckoning going on in the craft beer industry on, kind of social values and gender equality and sexism and racism and all that stuff going on. And, a lot of these breweries and beer companies are getting called out, and then they're issuing a statement, and then, everything goes back to normal. And, one of the things we didn't want to be is, reacting to things that are going on in the world. We wanted to be proactive about it, again, by putting our values up front, by saying, hey, we stand for these things. We believe in these things. If you have questions or you want to talk, please come talk to us, and kind of, start to set up what that framework will be. And then the next step, to your point of like, what kind of programs and things are we interacting with, is, to start to find those people in the communities that are working on similar values or similar things, right? Reach out to, there's a couple of organizations, NGOs, like 1% for the Planet, which, will take in your money, 1% of whatever your sales are, and they'll help you try to find, resources and programs and charities and NGOs and people that are working on the things that you care about. So you get to say, hey, I care about these values as a person. Obviously ours is environment and social justice. So they'll partner you with, let's say, a summer camp that brings, kids from an urban area into nature and says, hey, we're going on a canoe trip, right? That's not something that necessarily would be thought about from a beer company perspective, right? Or from, this perspective, but it's just trying to find those resources and those programs that align with our values, and then, trying to support those in whatever way we can.
That's awesome. And Jedi is Star Wars.
We don't talk about that from a legal perspective, too much, but yeah, I mean, it's a great movie.
Yeah.
but it's something catchy. And I think, when we were talking just before this podcast, one of the things around climate change, around social justice, is it's really heavy, right? It's very, very dense topic. It sometimes, can go in a negative way. And I think, by having a company like ours, we have an opportunity to bring a more positive spin, or bring some of these issues into a daily, more palatable kind of context. And that's one of the reasons we started this company. Was beer is something that everyone kind of sits around and drinks with their friends and has discussions about life and the world and things like that. And so if we can kind of provoke that conversation into the right direction, whether it's about climate change, social justice, or whatever, I think that adds value, and it becomes a more palatable, approachable way for a consumer to interact with some of these conversations. So again, it's just, Jedi is something that's super catchy, and then you look at the can, you realize, hey, it actually stands for something. How do I feel as a person about, these words and what's on this can, right?
That's awesome. Loving it. Can you tell us a little bit about basically eliminating inequality in the brewing business? How are you dealing with that within your own company? You basically have answered this, but if you can give it a different spin.
Yeah, I mean, like most of these questions, we could go on for a long time. I'm giving you the quick bullet points here, but specifically, again, when I think about, okay, how do we reduce as a company inequality within our own company? How do we hire diverse people, diverse voices, diverse opinions, and whatever? I think it starts again with this core set of values, or this perspective that we're putting on it, which is to align ourselves with people who care about what we're trying to do here, right? We're not necessarily hiring the person who has the most experience. What we're doing is trying to find people that align with our goals, right? And I think that happens, and you generally start to attract, the idea of like, whatever energy you put out, you attract back to you, kind of like that karma, idea, which is, again, if we have our values on a can, we talk about what we're doing, we have it straight, on our website and things like that, it will attract naturally people with diverse opinions, or people with different, perspectives on things. And so, right away, like you start to see, okay, where are we posting for jobs? What are we doing? What kind of positions? What kind of requirements are we doing? So a lot of this comes back to, when I'm looking at it as a business leader, who am I hiring, and what perspective does that person have? What experience does that person have? What background? And, am I putting up roadblocks, to stop people who maybe don't have as much experience, or am I trying to remove those roadblocks as much as possible? So, there's a couple things that you can do, as a business leader, and as, in the brewing industry specifically, which is, I think definitely promote what values you stand for as a company. And it, can be different than mine. It just has to be out there so that people can understand what kind of company you are. Mm-hmm. It's, trying to find other places that are not normally, let's say job postings are not normally found for that industry. So, instead of CanadianCraftBeerJobs.com, we post to, Indeed, or we post to Kijiji, or we post to places that other alternative voices and alternative people, can see that. And then I think, it's also what kind of training programs are we having here internally in our organization. When somebody does get hired with maybe less experience or from a different background, how are we bringing them into what we're doing, and how are we bringing their skill set and their voice and letting it be heard at the table, as opposed to just being like, okay, we're hiring you for a diversity hire, which is not something that we necessarily want to be as a company, right? We want to be an organic company that cares about what we're doing and that cares about the people. And I think the stronger, the more opinions you have, the more diverse voices you have at the table, the stronger your company is going to be, right? So again, it comes back to, standing up for what your values are, talking about them regularly, even on podcasts like this, finding those, diverse hires and finding those people that have a different perspective and allowing people to kind of remove roadblocks that might be in the way. And then, just looking at everything from a different perspective. I think that's what internally what we can do as a company. And then, externally as a company, I think, by establishing these new sets of standards as a business, I think we can carry the conversation forward and, start to be involved in, what other breweries are doing, what other industries are doing, and what other businesses are doing.
Can you tell us a little bit about how you established the company beyond what we went through in the beginning?
Yeah. So basically my background has been in hospitality. So, bars and restaurants and things like that. I worked in downtown Toronto bars for a long time. I saw a lot of, issues, let's say, in the hospitality industry, and, learned some great things and some not great things, from each business that I worked with. Myself and my business partner, Eve, we were consulting. We started our own little consulting company to help small businesses with, some of the knowledge that we had gained through some of these corporate jobs that we were working. And we took that, and it was the middle of the pandemic, and we started to work on a project for a hotel on a place called Wolfe Island. And Wolfe Island is near Kingston, Ontario, and it's in the middle of the St. Lawrence River, and it's an island, and it's a largely agricultural focus island originally, and has a lot of indigenous ties and things like that as well. Mm-hmm. And so we were out there on this island, and these guys that we knew wanted to buy this hotel, which was kind of a community staple, and use it for this community farm to table aspect that I had been personally learning about. And the way that the world is going is, we want more community spaces. We want more spaces for people, farmers markets, and, where is this grown, and, how do we involve the entire community in something that becomes an economic benefit to the community? So that was the fundamental project that we were working on. And I had in the background been studying sustainability, SDGs, science targets, and reading as many books as I can about, what the future looks like. Because I think as a business leader and as a business owner, you need to look into the future. You need to look in the past, but you also need to look in the future and start to realize, hey, there's some trends here. There's some things that I should be, learning about. So when we got a chance to do this project, which kind of mixed our hospitality backgrounds, our business backgrounds, and personally my sustainability backgrounds, it kind of gave us a new perspective that there's an opportunity for this, right? There's an opportunity for businesses to do things differently. And then we're on the island, and there's down the street, there's a hop farm on the island that had just started, and there's an abandoned brewery. And we're like, hey, we like beer. Maybe there's something that we can do here to combine some of these ideas of sustainability, of farm to table, of, local producers, of hop farms and beer. And so on the drive home, literally from Kingston to Toronto, which is a couple hour drive, myself and my business partner, we started to decide, hey, what if we looked at everything from a different perspective and applied it to an industry like this? What can we accomplish with that? And then, we went out there, we posted a couple jobs and stuff, and we found Bernardo, and Bernardo is our brewmaster. And he is originally from Venezuela and worked at one of the biggest breweries in Venezuela called Polar. He then got an internship to go to Germany and study in, some of the oldest breweries in the world, oldest hop farms and, malting facilities and things like that. Got his master's degree in brewing and beverage technology, and then came to Canada. And so, he happened to work at some of the bigger breweries here in Molson, Labatt, and things like that. And again, kind of shared our values. And again, this is something that comes back to what we were talking about. How do we diversify this industry is,
Yeah.
We put out this job description on a non-traditional platform that basically said, hey, we're trying to do things differently from a sustainability perspective, from a climate change perspective. Does someone want to be our brewmaster? Because we don't know how to make beer. And, he saw this job posting and aligned with it because we had put straight up there, these are the values that we look for, in somebody who wants to be our partner. And he resonated with those values of sustainability and, climate change and science and how do I bring this all together? And so for him, this became an opportunity for, to apply all the things that he'd been learning through school and through these other breweries into a project like ours. So it's kind of like an organic way that this all came together, and we just kind of put the pieces and the players and the people together, and we just said, "Hey, let's start a revolution here. Let's do some stuff differently."
Yeah, I really love the background of the company, and where you guys are going with it. Can you tell me a little bit about how you're encouraging people beyond the confines of your business to kind of tackle these issues like climate inequality, particularly outside of your business?
Yeah, I think that's actually one of the most important questions is, everyone can do something specific to their industry or their business or their life or whatever to make change. But I think, as a society, we need to all kind of come together. And so, people are struggling right now. Society is struggling. Consumers are struggling. They realize that climate change and things are happening in the world, social justice issues, but they don't necessarily know how to interact with them in a positive, approachable way. And, that's actually going to create change. And so, I think, as an entrepreneur, I don't think you can just start a business these days without considering these things, right? And how do you interact what role do you play in that consumer's life, right? So, when we talk about Karbon, yes, we make beer. Yes, we make awesome beer for the record. But, it's really more about the concept and the idea of doing things differently and getting consumers to be able to interact in an approachable way. So I think if I can personally do anything, or if we can do anything as a business, it's to not only inspire consumers to look into, processes and look into companies and look into where that was grown. A lot of people will ask, hey, what's on my plate? Where was this made or where was this grown, right? They'll say, okay, where was this meal produced or, grown in the farm next door or across overseas? And, what is the impact of that on the plate? Then they'll just drink a regular beer. They'll just be like, oh, cool. Must be a great beer. It's from a local producer or whatever, or from a big producer. But a lot of times, let's say the hops are grown in New Zealand and then shipped all the way to Canada. And, there's a carbon emission, associated with that. So I think it's just getting consumers to ask questions. I think it's, starting to inspire people that you can actually make a positive impact. I'm no different than you are. So I'm no different than anyone else. But if you actually believe in something and you want to create change, you just have to start. And so for entrepreneurs and business owners, I hope to kind of write a new playbook of that you can make a business that cares about the environment, cares about social justice, cares about the things that are going on in the world, still makes money, still makes profit, because at the end of the day, you need capital, you need money, you need resources to be able to create change. And what do you do with that, at the end of the day? So, I hope to inspire consumers to ask questions, and I hope to, inspire other industries to look at their processes. And then I hope to inspire any entrepreneur or student or anybody who's interested in business that you can actually have a different business model and it makes sense from a business perspective, right?
It's difficult to do something new, but you guys are doing it very effectively from what I've seen. With our own business, with the podcast, we're trying to do the same sort of thing to try and give people an idea they can do things that make change. The individual can do a lot, but we've kind of got ourselves away from that idea. And so when a company like yours comes up and says, hey, you can do something new, it's very, very, very beautiful to see.
Yeah, I think you bring up a couple of good points there, which is, first of all, we chose a really hard industry. We chose an industry that's very regulated, first of all, by provincial regulations and things like that. And so, it's very controlled substance. Where we can sell, how we can sell, all the pricing and all that stuff is very controlled. So that's the first challenge.
Yeah.
Second challenge is it's a very saturated industry. It's been around for a long time. There's a lot of craft breweries. There's a lot of breweries in general. And so, we chose a very saturated, very regulated, controlled industry. And not to mention, we said, okay, we're going to slap this new layer of sustainability or climate change and different, perspectives on things, on top of that. And we said, okay, I guess we're going for one of the hardest things that we can do here. But to your point, I think, that was the goal. The goal was to choose something that's very saturated and, regulated and things like that, and still be able to make some sort of change with it. And, obviously I appreciate you saying that we're doing a good job so far, but, we're just getting started. So I hope there's, some more to come. But even having discussions like this on your podcast, I think does, fulfill your goal there of sort of starting to create change and show people that this can happen, right?
Brings me to my next question. How are you dealing with supply chain security, and can you give any advice to small business owners on how they can deal with that situation?
Yeah, of course. I think, again, COVID brought into perspective, supply chain challenges as the entire world is shutting down or opening up, constantly. And, where are you getting all the materials for your business, right? If you make a beer, what goes into that? There's, 6, 7, 8 different things inputs wise that go into that. And where are all these things grown or made or manufactured? And, at the end of the day, resources come from somewhere, right? They come from the ground, or they come from the air, or they come from, people, or whatever it is, or animals. And so where are you getting these resources? So with regards to supply chain, again, as I mentioned, our story happened fairly organically, right? We drove down the street and there's a hop farm sitting there saying, hey, we're a new local producer. We want to sell some hops to people. So we said, hey, can we be your first customer? But at the same time, the idea of climate change, I think, to kind of circle back to some of the other questions in general, is starting to show businesses in general, whether it's a small business or a large business, that there are risks involved, right? And whenever there's a risk involved in a business theory, people start to look at it and say, hey, how can I de-risk this, investment, this portfolio, this company, this issue? And so I think that's where we are as a shift to supply chain as well, which is, hey, supply chain is becoming a risk. And if you have a risk, you need to work on eliminating that or mitigating that risk, as much as possible from a business perspective. And so it's pretty cool because, as a small business owner, my thought process is, where is this grown? Cool. What's the cheapest, easiest way that I can get this to where I am? But then you add the carbon footprint mapping and all that stuff on top of it. But, realistically, you're also starting to see the big players realize, hey, we need to build up a secure supply chain. So by applying the same lens to a small business owner, it's okay. You might not be able to get 100% of your materials local right now, or, from a local producer or somebody that's trustworthy or, has the best product or whatever, quality wise, but what you can do is identify those players that are growing, right? So you can find local producers that are just starting out, just like you. You can support other small businesses along the way. And you say, hey, for our example, you can say, hey, you guys are growing hops. Can you start to grow more hops for us as a producer? If we can continue to grow our production, can you keep up with our demand? And can we slowly shift away from having to get our supplies from somewhere else and start to support you, right? Because you can clearly identify and make those connections between the local economy and where your dollars and things are being spent, and how that helps them grow their supply chain as well. So, I think you look at climate change, and that affects the weather, and then that affects agriculture, and affects everything that's going on. And if you start to slowly identify those people who are, again, working on shared values, working on the people, working on the same things as you, you can build up that supply chain with you. And I think that is the way you de-risk kind of, this issue of supply chain, which is, if I order my hops from China or from New Zealand, there's a lot of risk involved with how far and with what's going on in that political climate or that economic climate that, affects whether or not I'm going to be able to get my product, to my customer, and what's the price of that product going to be, right? If something happens on the other side of the world, is that going to throw my price, through the roof, and then I won't make any money, on the other side of it. So again, it's saying, okay, we're not going to be 100% local yet because, we can't physically, fulfill demand with local producers yet. But what we can do is identify those people we want to work with and ask them what they need to succeed and to grow with you. And then, support them through that journey, which then de-risks and, secures your supply chain along the way and ultimately helps the local economy when you talk about buying local, right?
Yeah. Yeah. The more local we can buy, the better it is for everyone. It creates opportunities for new producers to come in and start building up a base. Sustainability in the food industry. I've worked in the food industry for 30 years. So from a cook's perspective, a lot's changed. A lot of the supplies are coming from other parts of the world. And I've seen a case of potatoes go from $30 a case to $80 a case. And it's kind of interesting how people pivot to deal with that. And I've found local producers, you pay a little bit more for the product, but it's more stable. You're not, yes, prices will go up as demand on the product goes up in the area, but it's more stable.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the key things is just because it's local doesn't mean it always has to cost more, right? Because if you think about it from a financial cost, yeah, it might be an extra $1, an extra $2, $5, whatever. But from, carbon emissions perspective, it's actually cheaper, right? So, it depends on how you measure what's more expensive and what's not. And I think, the other thing that you mentioned, which is, potatoes and where those are grown and, where do I buy them from? We need to work on solutions for, how do we grow that same quality, same amount, whatever it is, of product in our local environment. And some things are not going to be possible, right? Because of climate and because of weather and certain patterns and stuff. You can't grow necessarily the best potatoes everywhere in the world. You have to be in certain temperate climates and stuff like that. But what research are we doing as a company to look at what goes into producing our ingredients, right? I think a lot of companies in general just go, oh, well, it just shows up in this format, in like a sack of potatoes shows up in my kitchen and I take them and I chop them into French fries and I sell them to consumers, right? You don't ask about, the inputs and what went into that process and, where those were grown and what resources are needed to grow potatoes. You don't even go to the potato farm or call up the potato farm and say, hey, how did you guys grow this potato? I think that question of, what can you do and how can you eliminate and how can you help them? Like maybe there's an opportunity for you to use that product in a different way or get it from a different source. So, it's really about doing the research, asking the questions and saying, hey, can I grow potatoes here locally? Is it the right climate? Or should I maybe be switching to a different product that is local, right? Maybe this is a good climate for potatoes, but not for corn. Okay, cool. Maybe we should be using more potato products as opposed to corn products in our recipes, in our menu. That's one of the things that we encounter in the beer industry is hops, right? Hops, certain types of hops, which are very, very popular right now. Don't get me wrong. Certain types are grown in New Zealand because that's the best climate for it. And if you think about traditional hop varieties, people are kind of bored of them almost in a lot of ways. And they want to hear, they want to try something new that they haven't ever tried before, but you can't always grow that new hop in the climate that we're in. So, when we were establishing our recipes and developing what our products are going to be, it's how can we use what the local ingredients are and still make a cool new style of beer with something that's locally grown here, right? So instead of a different challenge of, what's the coolest, newest flavor we can add to this beer, it's how can we use old traditional flavors and make them into something new or something exciting that people want to drink, right?
We'll be right back. Yeah. I'm going to ask this is off the cuff a bit. How many varieties of hop are there?
Honestly, I don't really know. It's not really my expertise. That's my brewmaster. I would say that there's probably a lot out there. And again, every day that there's new agricultural innovations, there's new hop varieties that are grown kind of thing, right? But
Yeah.
traditionally, I would say there's probably 10 to 12 varieties that are somewhat more common in a lot of the production. And then, now you're getting more hops from all over the world, from different producers who are doing some really, really cool, awesome things, right? It's like any industry, right? There's somebody who's trying something new, and that just happens to be some new exciting hop variety. And then you put that into your beer and you say, hey, cool, we got the newest hop. But, around here, there's certain traditional hops in Ontario that we can grow better than other ones. And, the other thing to consider is it takes 3 years to grow hop. Right. So to get like an actual yield from your hop farm, you have to start 3 years in advance. And so when you look at trend chasing and, what's the newest variety of beer and newest variety of hop, you have to start 3 years before that. So, the hop producers, especially local ones, which are small businesses, don't have the resources of the capital to produce, let's say, 40 varieties of hops. So they've said, okay, we're going to grow these 3 or 4 or 5 varieties at the beginning. And they're locked in to those varieties for the next 3 to 5 years, before they can plant more. So again, we had to look at our local producers and say, what are you producing? And can we use that in our recipes, right?
Okay. With the heat wave last year, did that affect the crop badly?
Yeah. So not specifically the heat wave, but, obviously climate change in general is affecting everything, right? You have forest fires in BC, you have floods, you have all these things going on. And some of our producers actually lost their crop. Some of them are weather related and some of them are, other things related, but, infestations of bugs or things like that. And again, it's an agricultural based industry. And we talked about securing supply chain. One of our producers lost almost the entire yield of crop. And, then that affects our recipe. It affects other recipes of other beer companies and stuff like that. And so again, one of the challenges was we said, oh crap, those were the hops that we bought. We needed to put those into our beer. What can we exchange and support? So we said, hey, what do you have left? And they said, we have this style of hop. And we said, okay, we'll take what you got for that style of hop and we'll try to work it into our recipes to make sure that our product is still consistent, but we can support you as a farmer, because that's hundreds of thousands of dollars of revenue that go out the window because they lost a year's worth of crop, right? So, and, barley producers in the same boat where, if some sort of insect or some sort of weather happens to that product, they lose their entire year's, product production, right? So it's quite an interesting challenge as we go into this more unstable weather pattern, and heat waves and, winters like this and things like that are going to continuously affect. And so there needs to be research done, in every aspect of this, process, again, saying, okay, how is this grown? What is grown where? And, as things start to fluctuate and obviously temperatures continue to rise across the globe, are certain varieties of hops or barley or grain or water, where's everything, put together? Is it going to survive what the future climate looks like in this area? Right. And then starting to find maybe alternative grains or alternative products or things that grow better in certain climates or whatever it is, and start to adapt and do research on, kind of experimental agriculture and what we can produce in the future. Okay.
Can you explain the circular economy model to everyone?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's a buzzword that gets tossed out there quite often. You got circular economy, you got closed loop, you got whatever to describe it. But if you think about traditionally a linear production cycle of any industry, including beer, you have inputs, you have production, and then you have outputs, right? It's a very straightforward line, right? And so the idea of a circular economy in general is to close that loop and make it into a circle. So instead of a straight line, it becomes a circle. And I think that's the best, easiest way that we can talk about what a circular economy is. And the idea is, okay, so when you put something in, you get something out, and you also get waste, or you get, resources are on the other side. And are you using every aspect of that in the next production cycle, or, to do something with that? So, it's not a new concept by any means. Like if you think about certain cultures, and people would take everything that they need, let's say from an animal, and they would reuse the other aspects of it, right? Mm-hmm. They would, appreciate the entire process or the entire plant. They wouldn't just take the leaves. They would, use the berries for whatever. They'd use the roots for whatever. And so the idea is to just reuse everything that you're producing for the next batch or for the next cycle or whatever it is. So us at Karbon, again, when you talk about our production cycle and our production model, for example, you have spent grains that spit out on the other side, right? So you have all this grains that are soaked now in beer, and like they get spit out on the other side. And so traditionally a brewer either brings that to a landfill because it's just waste, they don't know what to do with it, or they feed it to farmers and pigs and stuff like that. So it becomes cattle feed or pig feed and things like that, which is an okay method, and it's what a lot of great breweries are doing right now. But that produces methane because the cows eat it and then they burp everywhere, and that becomes a whole issue. So there's still a cost associated with that. But basically, can we do something else with this byproduct, right? So we have spent grains. Some companies are turning it into bread. Some companies are turning it into, animal food, dog food, things like that. Again, we just chose to take it, put it into something like a biodigester, which actually breaks down all of the organic matter, and it actually creates fuel out of that. And so when we talk about fuel, this is a clean fuel that's created in our own environment that is completely captured, and we use that source of fuel for energy. So instead of getting fuel from the energy grid, we actually can create our own fuel with this organic matter that we're producing. So it becomes zero waste. And then we use that fuel to then boil the next batch or heat the next, batch up. So we can really close all the loops. So another example is steam. Let's say you have steam coming out of, your pot when you boil it or whatever. If you could capture that steam and reuse it to, the condensation, the water, the heat that's lost in that process, can you capture that before it goes anywhere and say, use it for the next boil or the next batch? So the idea of this kind of closed loop economy or circular economy is something that we're definitely trying to do. And I think, a lot of other companies, other industries can start to do as well.
Excellent. Using it for fuel, I didn't even consider that when we started talking about it, but that's ingenious. You don't lose anything, you gain from it. I think more companies should be doing that.
Well, yeah, I think to elaborate on that more, that is the core of our business model, is to change the way that we manufacture things in general, right? If you manufacture things right now, our world, this might get a little bit off topic globally and internationally, philosophically here, but when you produce things, there's generally waste associated with it, right? So are consumers going to stop buying products? Probably not, right? Ideally, we start consuming as much, and we reduce our consumption, as you mentioned, with the individual contribution.
Yeah.
But the population of the world continues to grow. Things continue to be made. There's new varieties of products that people want to buy. So from my perspective, the most effective way to create change is to create a different way that you use in manufacturing, and to reinvent that process. We're kind of going through what I'm calling a climate change revolution, in the same way that you got the industrial revolution or the agricultural revolution, where humanity just said, oh, something could be done better here, right? And I'm hoping that's happening with more than just my company, and it is happening in a lot of clean tech and other companies as well. But what if the idea wasn't that you put 5 things in and you get 1 thing out? What if the idea is that you put 5 things in and you get 6 things out, or 7 things out, and you're actually creating more from less, right? Because if you can do that, then you start to create this idea of more of a circular economy, or infinite resources, or more you're giving back more to the planet or to people than you take from it, right? So instead of so traditionally, to give you more perspective on our business model, without getting too into NDAs and issues of here, but basically you put in water, energy, hops, barley, and yeast, right? That's the traditional 5 inputs. In our system that we're developing right now, you'll be able to actually get almost 12 different things on the other side, right? Again, it's things like fuel that you can create from the organic matter that now you can put into your own process to save yourself energy costs for the next batch. Yeah. Then through that process, you're also creating things like fertilizer. So you're creating fertilizer for farmers. You also have tie-ins with things like algae. So algae is a way that you can sequester CO2. So, and it actually has a higher sequester rate than, let's say, trees do. So instead of planting trees, can we funnel some of our emissions into algae production and then spit out algae on the other side? And what we do with that, food products or, food insecurities and things like that can be, actually helped to be produced. So again, it's the idea of putting 5 things in and getting 12 things out that not only create more revenue for our business, but also, generally change the way you manufacture things. If we can do it like as a small company, and as you mentioned earlier, like it's kind of a challenge to do that. But if we're successful in any sort of capacity of doing this, then we can apply that same technology, that same methodology and business model to, food and beverage worldwide, other producers, soft drinks, all that kind of stuff. And so, the idea of manufacturing where you put 5 things in, you get 1 thing out, I think is obsolete at this point. So we need to start thinking in a different perspective, right?
Yeah. Using every part of what you're creating from to make more. That's beautiful. Can you tell me a little bit about the varieties of beer that you guys create?
Yeah. So currently, again, we're only like less than 2 years old here, but one of the approaches to our product selection here, because it's a very sensitive topic. Everyone loves certain types of beers or doesn't love beer, and they love certain types of other drinks and things like that out there. Not everyone drinks. But one of the key things that we had to look at was if we go after every trend, if we chase every, whatever, it doesn't really fit with our business model, right? Mm-hmm. Our business model fundamentally is to build up our supply chain, find new manufacturing processes, solve climate change, do all these things that we have been talking about in this podcast. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't happen if we're chasing trends, right? It doesn't happen if we, pick the newest local or newest hop variety that's, grown somewhere else in the world. It has to be something that's somewhat consistent with our product lineup. The other thing is we want to be very inclusive in what we're producing, right? Again, it comes down to the inequality issue and social issues of, if you make these very, very expensive niche beers, not everyone can access that, right? Not every person can buy that and appreciate that and support you as a company. So one of the things we said was, how do we make, not mainstream necessarily, but really like approachable flavored beer that gets into the fridge of everyone in the world, or everyone in Canada, or everyone in our province, right? How can we make beer accessible, and how can we make these topics accessible? Our plan only works if we get a can in everyone's fridge in Ontario or Canada or in the world. So, it actually lend us to creating products that are very, very approachable to the average drinker or the average consumer, and then being inclusive about what we're trying to do. So we started with, instead of starting with one type of beer, which again becomes, not as inclusive, we started with 3. So currently we have an IPA, which is our Jedi, Justice, Equity, Diversity, Inclusion IPA, which is, again, a fairly mainstream style of IPA. We didn't go really hoppy or crazy flavor, crazy bitterness. We went something that's very approachable, right? We have Helles Lager, which is a German style lager, which is in the cans are beside me here on the shelf. So that's the black can. And that beer just won an award for the best new beer in Canada.
Awesome.
From the Canadian Brewers Journal awards there. And we actually did a joint lecture series with them on sustainable practices and turning waste into opportunity, which is much of the concept that we talked about here. Mm. So we have a Helles German style lager. Obviously, Bernardo, our brewmaster, he went to Germany, he trained there, very familiar with that kind of style of beer, and it's one of his favorites. And then the third one, which is actually more of a niche beer, but, niche in consideration, right? If you look at the data tables, but it's a Belgian style wheat beer, right?
Yep.
Which it might be in most people's mind as more of a niche flavor, but actually wheat beers are one of the most, popular beers in the world. And they're very crushable and very, open to different things and palatable for people who don't necessarily even drink beer. So we went with this traditional Belgian wheat style, which has, orange and coriander flavors and things like that. The fourth product, which we're still working on right now, is actually a vodka soda. And I know that there's a huge, seltzer trends, low ABV, all these different types of things. But the reason that we created that is actually, not only to just show a different demographic and invite a different demographic into, our process here and supporting what we're doing with climate change, in the conversation, but it also includes, people who can't drink gluten. Right. There's gluten-free beers out there, but they're, not few and far between. But if you make a product that's accessible to a different dietary requirement or different dietary thing, then it also opens up the conversation for a lot more people. So our fourth one is a vodka soda with cherry flavor from, local cherry producers here in Ontario. And again, we're trying to do everything properly and do all this stuff. So those are the 4 styles that we started with. We're also coming in with like a light lager, which actually uses, again, it comes back to, hey, suppliers, what are you guys creating and what can we do with that? It's almost like a chef choosing their menu based on, the farm that day. one of our local hop farms, the Wolf Island hop farm that I talked about before, they said, hey, we're growing these Kirin hops, which is a Japanese style variety. And we said, cool, can we make, a beer with that, as opposed to just going out and trying to get different types of beer. So we made that into a light lager, which we're going to hopefully release in the next couple months.
That's awesome. Throughout my life, I've been partial to stouts, but I grew up in Nova Scotia. Keith's Brewery is probably the main one that I can think of in Halifax. You guys, how do you think what you're doing will impact what they do?
What specifically Keith's does, or what some of the bigger players do?
What some of the bigger players do, because they're all looking at you right now, seeing what you're doing.
I hope so.
And probably gonna try and copy your model because it's to their benefit.
Yeah, no. First of all, I want to address the stout question. Darker beers generally take more input to create. So it's actually worse. So it's not that we haven't considered making a stout or a porter or one of the darker beers, but, the malting facility, the malting process to make that dark color and that dark flavor actually takes a lot more energy and electricity and things like that. And also traditionally, a lot of those flavors come from Europe, from like England and Ireland and Scotland and, those places. So again, there's a more associated carbon footprint. So it's not that we don't like stouts. We definitely love stouts, but we went through the calculation of saying, what can we create and what is the lowest impact, right? So we went down to the very, decimal point of what would be the lowest impact product that we can create. So hopefully maybe one day we figure the process out and we can make a stout or a porter, but for now, staying away from the darker beers right now. But I think to your other question of like the bigger producers, and I hope that everyone's, kind of watching us a little bit, and hopefully that we can kind of change, and influence some of these bigger players, because I think small businesses can do that, right? They just have to do it in a different way. We're a lot more nimble. We're a lot more able to be a lot more innovative than, some of these bigger producers. So hopefully they're looking to companies like mine to say, okay, what are these guys doing, differently? What is this player doing differently? And how can we then adapt that model, to your point? And one of the core concepts of our business model is actually to find solutions and then share them with the rest of the industry. I think that's something that's very key to not only us, but also solving climate change. Is if we just said, okay, we're making this awesome brewing system that is going to be zero emissions and it's going to be, circular economy and all this stuff, and we keep it for ourselves, like that actually doesn't work with our philosophy, right? So we have to, in a lot of ways, we have to find the solutions and then say, hey, look at me, I found the solution for, this process or, this emission strategy. So, our goal is actually to take this technology or take these solutions we find and then say, hey, big players, do you want to implement this in your system? Mm-hmm. So for example, like I know that AB InBev, which is, Keith's and Labatt and things like that. Yeah. Even though in a lot of people's eyes, they're looked at as, the enemy, they're doing a lot of harm in the world and a lot of harm in the beer industry or whatever. And they're making very generic lagers, who knows, right? Whatever anyone's perspective on them is. But, I heard the CEO of AB InBev speak about some of the same issues that I'm talking about now. And it's on their radar for sure, right? How do they get to net zero? How do they reduce their emissions? Because they are running into the same risks that we are. Right. And as I mentioned before, the second that the risk becomes too high, every financial insurance person, every accountant is like, hey, get on this problem and start to mitigate this problem before it becomes an issue. So, again, I'm hoping to have those conversations with the larger players at some point and make enough noise that they look at us and say, hey, how did you do this? What did you do here? And can we implement it? Because let's say we are successful in finding a solution and we go to AB InBev and we share that with them or we sell that to them or whatever it looks like. Then they produce 60% of the world's beer. And if we can reduce the emissions of 60% of the world's beer, that's almost 1% of global GHGs, just to let you know. So like alcohol and beer almost produces 1% of all emissions in the world. Okay. And if 60% of that comes from a company like AB InBev and we're able to reduce emissions of that company, then you're actually making a significant impact on climate change. So, it is part of our process to, want these people to look at us and say, hey, we'll do the research for you. We'll help do this, find the solutions, but then how do we implement that at scale?
I really like that you guys are innovating while building your company. How far do you see your company going in the next few years?
I mean, I'm a pretty ambitious guy, so I I hope it keeps growing, and I hope we keep we're not the thing that makes us different on the innovation side of things is we don't just have like a unicorn patent, right? Like we don't have like a hey, I'm not some inventor that sat in my garage and made a better way to do something necessarily. We are a company that is built around innovation and continuous innovation, right? There's never going to be, a good enough solution for us. And that's, to one of your questions, maybe I didn't answer properly about going carbon negative, right? If we just went carbon neutral and we just said, cool, we're not going to produce any emissions and we're just going to be zero, right? Yeah. That's not good enough for me. Like we have to go past that. We have to actually, like I said, give back more or pull out more CO2 from the atmosphere or whatever it looks like and go past zero. And so, carbon negative, carbon positive, that's that kind of concept. So as an innovation company, what we're doing actually, and this, depending on when this episode comes out, hopefully there'll be some knowledge around this topic, but we're partnering with a university. So we're actually partnering with a university that's local in Ontario to do research on a lot of these things. And so when we hit, one solution, we're going to continue to go and find more solutions. So we're actually, in a lot of ways, that innovation piece that you're talking about, and we're tied to research and academics, and we're tied to, innovation and pushing things forward. So it's never going to be enough for us. We're going to continue to find solutions, and then hopefully, again, like filter that up to, general population or bigger competitors.
Every successful business I've ever seen has had the ability to adapt and pivot to changing environments. And what you just said basically says to me that you guys are going to be very successful in what you're doing. And I hope you keep doing it.
Yeah, I think one of the key concepts when I was studying about businesses in general is to be truly sustainable, and that word's used quite a bit and overused like a lot, but, to be truly sustainable, you have to be a sustainable business as well and be around for the next 100 years. And so the concept of the 100-year business plan or the concept of, being around or creating a business that's here in 100 years is to your point of like, what core concepts drive your company forward, and how do you adapt to the trends and the changes and everything that's going to happen, because today's business environment is different than 20 years from now. And if we just built around today's business environment and we said, okay, sour beers are really popular right now, we're going to make a bunch of great sour beers, and that's all we're going to do, that might be successful in 20 years, but it might not be, right? So we chose to focus on creating change and being innovative and trying to find research and solve problems. And that is the core concept of our business.
That's cool. I wish you all the luck in that. I have one last question for you.
Sure.
Where can people find your brews?
That's actually the most disappointing question, because I know that there's probably going to be people around, all over that hopefully want to support us after hearing the story. We're only available currently in Ontario, unfortunately at this point, but, we're province wide at this point. We've, signed some distribution contracts, all of which we have to track the emissions of where we're sending all of our beer and things like that. At one point, somebody said to me, hey, this concept would be very popular on the West Coast, to your point out in Victoria. And we said, oh yeah, that would be great. But then we had to calculate what the emissions of shipping beer out there, via plane or train or automobile or whatever, would be. And it doesn't make sense for us to do that. Eventually maybe what we'll do is we'll be able to work locally there to produce, beer locally as well. And so, kind of bring that model around. But yeah, currently right now you can buy our beer in the LCBO. So the LCBO is the main liquor store in Ontario. Most grocery stores, bars and restaurants, basically anywhere in Ontario, you can either ask for us or, purchase us hopefully. And then eventually we'll hopefully grow that production and that distribution around.
Okay. I really enjoy talking to you. I love your company, and I like where you're going with it. To hop back to an earlier question where you said you were growing algae from your process. Algae can actually be used as feed for cattle to reduce their emissions, which that is kind of cool, because you can. I recently did some research on this particular scientist who is looking at the effectiveness of it. And you can remove up to 80% of their emissions by feeding them algae, according to her research so far.
Yeah. No, I mean, yeah, we didn't get too much into that kind of like the aspect of algae or, biodiversity and what role that plays and all these other cool, concepts of climate change that you can do. But yeah, a lot of our research is on what's the best way to sequester CO2, right? Because we just simply ask ourselves, okay, we have all this, CO2 that we're producing. What can we do with it, first of all? And how do we reduce it and how do we sequester it? And then again, going past that zero, if we just said, okay, well, we're just going to take our CO2 and reuse it in our beer or something like that, that would make us zero. That's great. But what can we actually do to impact the rest of the world's emissions as well? And so things like producing algae, sequestering it with other companies. And again, it's not necessarily our technology or our system, that we developed. We're not algae growers, right? But we have partnered or found partners that are working on those kind of algae solutions. And we plug that into our system and we say, okay, we'll feed our emissions through an algae system that grows more algae. And then we take that algae and we feed it to cows or people, it goes to food scarcity as well. And so, yeah, there's a lot of things that you can do when you start to look at your waste as an opportunity for other things.
That's awesome. Well, I'm going to end it on that positive note. Thank you very much for coming on with me.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I think it's really important what you're doing, and it's really important to get these positive outlooks on what's going on in the world. And I think thank you for having me, and thank you for sharing people's stories on what people and consumers can do better. And I think that's a really key portion of this fight against climate change. So thank you very much.
No problem. Thanks a lot.
I want to thank Tyson and Karbon Brewery for joining us for our final episode of the Earth Day series and our final episode of Season 1. In this episode, we talked about many interesting ways brewing can be done in a climate-responsible way. We mentioned algae at the end as a means of reducing cow gas emissions. Another scientist is testing seaweed as a means of doing the same thing. Seaweed has been used by farmers for centuries to keep their crops and animals healthy. We ended the season with beer. It's a fitting end to a great journey, don't you think? We wanted to thank you all for joining us in this great journey we've all been on in Season 1. Without you, we wouldn't have been able to do this. Thank you. We are currently recording Season 2 and ask your help in sending ideas for episodes. Please like, follow, and subscribe on whatever platform you listen on. You can also support us by donating to our archive at www.mistyrecreations.com. That's www.mistyrecreations.com. Soon we'll be opening our Patreon, in which you'll have exclusive content and merchandise. So keep an eye out for that. We'll post about it on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Take care, and we'll see you soon.